What's happening at the Greek borders? How will Greece survive this again? And how will we survive if the poor Greeks don't know what to do with this flood of migrants? Because once again, that is what we are going to talk about today. As we know, Greece has been under pressure for years due to its geographical location in the Mediterranean. It's not a fortunate position. They have become the buffer zone between migrants and the rest of Europe. And honestly, what they are facing today, well, no one would wish on their worst enemy. Just in the past few weeks, over 2,000 migrants have attempted to enter Greece through Crete. Unlike in 2015, this time, most of the migrants are coming from Libya. And if you look at the photos once again, these aren't families, not mothers saving their children from Libya. No. It's primarily young men trying to enter Europe. And poor Greece is doing what it can over and over. Honestly, I agree with what they have done now. Athens has announced that they are suspending asylum procedures for at least 3 months for those arriving from Libya. But of course, the EU and the mass of NGOs are already attacking Greece, accusing them of breaking this or that law, saying Greece has no right to do this. I think they do have the right. They must protect their sovereignty and their citizens. And Greece is not only protecting itself, they are protecting us too. Let's pause for a second and reflect on this. There is no war in Libya. Yes, the situation is bad, tragic even. But the right to asylum isn't based on whether life in a country is good or bad, whether there is wealth or not, or whether someone has a job opportunity or not. That's called economic migration or irregular migration. What we are seeing again is a tsunami of mostly young men coming without any papers, thinking this is some sort of entitlement. At the same time, the EU once again accuses Greece of breaking the law, claiming their action violates both the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights and the 1951 Geneva Convention, just because Greece said, stop, we have reached our limit. We don't have the capacity or the infrastructure, and we don't want these migrants entering our country. The New York Times published strongly critical articles about Greece. It claims that the Greek authorities are conducting the so-called pushbacks, placing migrants in engineless boats and pushing them back into international waters. The articles also claim that the Greeks confiscate migrants' phones, take their clothes, and often abuse them. Now, I fully support the Greek approach at large. They have every right to protect themselves. And since they are the buffer zone between the migrants and the European continent, I want to thank them for trying to save our continent. What bothers me, though, is that the EU's double standard is present again. Greece gets the slap on the wrist, maybe a warning, while we, the Hungarians, were punished even for creating a transit zone. But if we really look at the situation, the transit zone is actually the logical solution. People can enter, we check who they are and why they want to come in, and then, if appropriate, they are let through the second door. That's both logical and human, and yet we got fined for that. And let's not forget, in 1956, it wasn't any different. When Hungarians fled to the West, say to America, they were held in Austria in exactly such transit zones under rather poor conditions. The US then evaluated who qualified to be let in. Back then too, not everyone could just go anywhere just because they called themselves a refugee. This also raises questions about how outdated these laws are, like the 1951 Geneva Convention. Back then, most migrants came from former colonies, often spoke the language, or had some form of legal right to enter Europe. But today's situation is entirely different. We are witnessing mass migration from people who live in a completely different ideological world. Even Huntington said this wouldn't be sustainable in the long term. Cultural differences will surface, he said, and they already have daily in Western Europe. Ideological and cultural conflicts are now part of everyday life. And let's briefly mention why the EU doesn't punish Greece, at least not to the way they punished Hungary. We were penalized for rejecting the quota system and for our transit zones because both were opposed by EU leaders. Yet in 2020, Ursula von der Leyen called Greece Europe's shield. The EU's leadership politically supports Greece because they are the ones holding back the migrant wave. And now everyone in Europe sees that this is the correct approach. No one wants to repeat what happened in 2015. So Greece gets the pass. They are doing the dirty work for everyone. We criticize them, but not too loudly. No official procedures are launched against them. In other policy areas, Greece isn't as rebellious as Poland or Hungary. So the EU says, well, they are only stepping out of line here. Let's just let it go. Even more intriguing is the fact that the Frontex, the EU's own border agency, has already cooperated with Greek authorities in these so-called pushbacks. That's why Fabrizio Leggeri, head of Frontex, resigned in 2022. So if the EU were to go after Greece, it would be implicating itself because Frontex helped with the very same practices. That would be politically embarrassing. The EU wouldn't want to undermine its humanitarian image on the world stage. So once again, everything is overlooked for Greece because if they were condemned, the EU would be condemning itself. So in conclusion, all I can say is that I stand with the Greeks. I feel deeply sorry for them for ending up in such a situation. But as a European, I thank them for protecting themselves and by doing so protecting us and the rest of Europe. And now it's time for the European Union to do us all a favor. Let's reset the debate and restart talks about migration from scratch. We cannot keep condemning Hungary for everything, especially now that even Western countries are beginning to realize that Orbán was right when he said, we don't want migrants who have no papers. We don't want migrants who bring ideologies incompatible with their European values. And we don't want migrants who are offended by our institutions' names. Just like in Germany, where they wanted to rename an Anne Frank kindergarten because some migrants objected to the name. Or the example where young girls were asked to cover their shoulders so as not to offend the migrants. Now look, we are Europeans. This is our culture. If a little girl's shoulders are showing, that's not a problem. In our culture, that's accepted.